It is 6 o'clock. We're going to call a meeting to order. This is fun. Thank you. Number one, receive communications from other commissions, State Historic Preservation Officer, and the general public.
You did have some communications for item number 1 on your agenda. Those were updated to the packet, and you should have them in your agenda packet.
Disclosure of ex-parte communications? Anyone? No? Abstentions? Nope. Committee reports.
You've had no committee meetings since the last meeting.
So we also have item B, Action Summaries. And so the November, all of 2019, so A, B, and C are to be considered separate, correct?
You can.
Okay. So has everyone had time to read item A, the November Action Summary? Anybody? So, kind of taking
18, is that right?
19. So,
This is 18.
oh yeah,
That's the 18th.
I would say that I don't know that I feel comfortable approving 18 and 2019 action summaries when I wasn't here.
right. So I would say abstain from those and then let.
Right.
Okay. And then I make a motion that we defer all the 2019 and item number C, the January 2020 action summary, until we have time to comb through it and actually read through it diligently. Anybody?
I would second that.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Passes unanimously. So do our homework before next meeting.
So did you include, you said 2019, were you including November 15th or 2018, or did you?
Yes, yeah, for all A, B, and C, with an abstention of 1 for item A and B.
You don't remember it?
I remember it just clearly.
Like it was yesterday.
You can pull out that book of notes. All right, so public comment for anything that's not
You
related.
have administrative approvals.
Oh, gosh, you're right. So B2, administrative approvals. Does anybody have any questions?
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Now for public comment not related to anything on our agenda. None. We'll move on to the public hearing. So DR 20-00004 for 1242 Massachusetts Street.
Hello, I'm Kyle Kilby with Planning. This is DR 20-00004, demolition for non-residential structure at 1242 Massachusetts Street. This application is being reviewed for a Certificate of Appropriateness. The property is within the environs of the John N. Roberts House at 1307 Massachusetts Street and South Park at 1140 and 1141 Massachusetts Street. The property in question is shown here on this slide. It's outlined in blue. You can see South Park to the north here, and then the John Roberts House down here, also known as the Castle or the Castle Tea Room. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing building on the property. The original structure is a masonry building primarily characterized by the A-frame style roof. The addition is a wood-framed 2-story building with a gabled roof facing Massachusetts Street. This is the addition, and this is the original structure here. The proposed plan would keep the existing parking lots in place, but the footprint of the building would be converted to green space, so the parking lot that you see here would remain and the building would be removed. According to the structural assessment provided by the applicant, there are a range of issues with the structure right now, and that range extends from replacing gutters all the way to issues with the foundation. According to the probable cost estimate provided by the applicant, demolition and new construction, for demolition and new construction versus renovation, new construction would be approximately 15% higher than renovation. However, demolition and reconstruction would likely lead to a structure with 2 to 3 times the lifespan of the current property, or the current structure, sorry. There's not a replacement plan for the property at this time. The applicant is proposing to demolish the structure, keep the parking lot in place, maintain the current easements that you see on the site, which are denoted in gray here, plant shrubs around the edge of the parking lot here per landscaping code, and no replacement plans in place at this time. If in the future, when or if a structure were to be proposed here, it would come back through the HRC review process similarly to any other structure that's being proposed in the environs of listed properties. The demolition of this structure would alter the environs of the listed properties, but this is a somewhat unique situation in that South Park is primarily characterized by open space itself and is immediately to the north of this and is one of the landmarks this is within the environs of. For that reason, staff recommends the commission find the proposed project will not significantly encroach on, damage, or destroy the landmarks or their environs, and issue the certificate of appropriateness for the proposed project. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
None? Thank you, Kyle. Is the applicant present?
Yes.
Would you like to speak?
Not at this time unless the commission has questions for us.
Okay, we're going to open it up to public comment.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Stan Hernley, architect and former commissioner with several of you. As a local business owner and historic property owner adjacent to the Douglas County Courthouse and a historic preservation professional in our community, I want you to know that I don't support the demolition of 1242 Massachusetts Street. I've provided information to the city staff and to the county staff and to County Commissioner Thelman outlining my objections. After seeing the HRC agenda earlier this week, I spent a little time researching the property. It's known as the Assembly of God Church, 1242 Massachusetts Street. The architect for the south portion, the A-frame is what people call it, was Leland R. Johnson. Architect A90 for the state of Kansas. He's a KU alumnus, graduated in 1942. He's a World War II veteran, author, architect, and he was briefly on the KU architecture faculty. At some point he moved to Wichita. I'm not sure what all he did there except write books. The only other structure in Lawrence that I found that was designed by him is the municipal baseball stadium at 11th and Massachusetts. And in some of the documents I've sent to you, there's a pretty nice hand rendering of the kind of sort of the bird's eye view of the stadium with the roof over the seating portion of it. The north portion of this structure is something that was added between 1966 and 1976. It shows up on the GIS on the city site plans. It's a pretty unfortunate addition. It really has no character that ties it to the original structure. And it would really be a blessing if it went away. The demolition of the 1950 portion, though, I think would be a shame to lose that part of it. I'm sure that it would be eligible for National Register listing, and I'd be willing to put together a PSIQ for the SHPO to review. It's one of the earliest mid-century modern structures in Lawrence. It was designed in 1948, construction completed in 1950, pretty much. They moved into it in 1950. They didn't have the official dedication ceremony till 1952. The architect, Mr. Johnson, said, "The design carries the spirit, if not the exact form, of Gothic architecture." It kind of fits a transitional phase, changing from eclectic design that was popular in the 1920s and early 30s, and before the real mid-century modern styles became prominent in town and popular. I believe that this portion of the building plays a pivotal role in establishing the character of the environs of both South Park and the John Roberts House, which is across Diagonal, Massachusetts and 13th. And I believe that the demolition of that part of the building would damage South Park and the John Roberts House. The 1905 Sanborn is the oldest Sanborn map that includes this part of town. And at least since that time, there's been a structure on this block south of South Park, and most likely earlier than that. And the elimination of all of the structures in this block would create a void where there hasn't been a void for many, many, many years. There are some photos that I went out for a walk the other day from my office. It's about a block from here. And this is a view looking south from South Park. This is the structure that we're talking about. The two-story addition here is the pre-1976. The large roof that you're seeing is the 1950 structure. This is standing at the corner of South Park Street in Massachusetts. On the left is the sign indicating the historic importance of South Park, and this is the view looking south from there. This structure is very prominent in that view. This is standing up on the porch of the John Roberts House looking to the northeast, and the structure is a really prominent feature in the view shed from the building. This is just a closer-up view. There are a few issues structurally. Some of the masonry, there's been some water infiltration into the pilasters, the Gothic features that the architect spoke about. There's a little bit of cracking in some of the pilasters on this side. The building still has a lot of fabulous historic fabric to it, the original steel windows, the stone masonry. It itself is a historic structure. I realize that the county currently has no use for the structure, and keeping it creates an ongoing cost for the county and for us, the taxpayers. However, just because the county doesn't need the building doesn't mean it has to be demolished. After speaking with others in the preservation community, I would suggest that the county consider demolishing the north portion of the building and splitting off the south historic portion under a separate lot and selling it for redevelopment. The north portion could be developed by the county for additional parking, which I think would be appropriate, and there's definitely a shortage of parking for the courthouse, and it'd be a good trade-off for keeping a historic building. I took a preliminary look at parking, and a parking lot expansion could add as many as 18 spaces. Saving the building would also set a good precedent, and it would show that the county commission and county staff support historic preservation in Douglas County. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have for me.
Thanks, Stan.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about this important building. And I must give Stan Hernley all credit for getting me here tonight, because this has been a sleeper for me for 30 years. I've driven by this church, haven't really looked at it very carefully, haven't appreciated it really until this week. And thank you for that photo. That was a beautiful photo. If you look at that for a moment, the blue sky, and you know, it's a very simple building, but it's beautiful in its simplicity, right? I think it is. So I strongly oppose the demolition request, and I hope that you will also. I'm one of the founders of Lawrence Modern. Our mission is to raise awareness of mid-century and modern architecture in Lawrence and promote its preservation to ensure that future generations of Lawrencians will have significant examples to appreciate and/or to live in. So I think we need to pause, and I understand why the county would like to make it go away. I'm sure the insurance company, whoever's insuring this building right now, is probably not too happy to be having it sit there vacant. It's clearly a liability. But I think we can think about reuse, repurpose. Terry and I actually own 2 churches, and guess what? They're repurposed and people are living in them, and the 2 people who are renting them right now would not want to live anywhere else. So I have 2 real-life examples of churches that could have, should have been demolished, but they're still standing, and I'm happy to be a part of that stewardship. So, as Stan told me yesterday, demolition is permanent. So I'd like to think about maybe asking the county to sell the property. There are people in this town who I think would be interested in maybe creating a living situation out of that building. There's a church at 10th in Kentucky, beautiful stone church. That was apartments, and now they're high-end condos. So I'm not saying we need to put high-end condos in this church, but it's a great example of a church being repurposed into 4 condos. And I am certain, if it's done right, who wouldn't want to live there? You walk to downtown and you have plenty of parking. Obviously, there's a big parking lot there. So I think it's time for us to think outside the box and think about other options besides demolition. And today I saw that we're having an open house at the fire station, our mid-century fire station, $7.14 million. So this town believes in repurposing and renovating, and we value our old structures. The depot, 2 blocks away, that's another great example of a mid-century building that the community has supported in terms of renovating and using. So this is no different. It's just been kind of sitting there on the corner, shut up, and lonely. So I think we can do something else besides demolish it. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is K.T. Walsh, and I represent the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association tonight. Unbeknownst apparently to the county, this building is in the East Lawrence neighborhood. And so I would stop in every few years and talk to our former county administrator, and he would reassure me, we do not intend to tear it down. We intend to rehab it. It's just mothballed for now. And the last time I talked to him was just before he retired, and he said, we have no plans to tear it down, Anyway, so when we found out the county was going to vote to tear it down, we were surprised that they hadn't come to the neighborhood. Apparently, they hadn't talked to the HRC when they voted, or the city. Nevertheless, we've exchanged emails with the current county administrator and Commissioner Patrick Kelly to try and get someone to come talk to the neighborhood or give us a meeting, to no avail. So we're here tonight. We've had a checkered past with the county. For many years, they owned 4 lots directly east of the police department. They intended to use for parking, an asphalt parking lot. For many, many years, we fought and said, that is residential. It's been residential since 1875, and we want it to remain residential. They finally agreed to work with the Lawrence Preservation Alliance and tenants to homeowners to allow homes to be built on that site. The other thing, when the city and county decided to build a new jail, they initially decided the jail should go just south of the police department where there is a parking lot now, which would have been 4 stories and between East Lawrence and South Park, and no parking for anyone. Anyway, we fought and fought on that one. They finally decided to put the jail elsewhere. So I guess I'm not super surprised that the county hasn't contacted us, but I agree with the 2 speakers who just talked to you, and I feel like at least part of it could be saved. I love the idea of repurposing it. We're looking right now for a place to put the Hope House, which there is money for from the feds to just build a Hope House for people who have chronic mental illness, need a place to live with a live-in social worker. We're desperate to find a place to put this. The money's there. So there's a lot of things that could happen. I would ask you to deny it, let everybody go back to the county. Let's talk about some other options. Thank you.
Is it appropriate for us to speak under public comment?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Or they can come after you take public comment. It would be rebuttal from the applicant.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there additional public comment? No? So, rebuttal? Now you can have your rebuttal.
Thank you, Commissioners, for hearing this application tonight. I'm Sarah Plinsky. I'm the County Administrator for Douglas County. With me, I have our Director of Buildings and Grounds, Dave Sparks, and our Director of Capital Projects, Jay Zimmershed. I appreciate the Commission hearing this request. I do want to say a few things. Douglas County has a long tradition of being supportive of historic preservation. The Douglas County Commissioners fund every year a Heritage and Cultural Resources Program that puts hundreds of thousands of dollars each year into historic preservation in this community. So I think it's important to state that the county strongly supports historic preservation, and we have done so in many opportunities where that has, including working in a 1905 historic courthouse that is a vibrant part of Massachusetts Street. So in addition to conversations about contact with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association, I apologize. I have tried to reach out. I have a standing commitment that night, and I've not been able to get other commissioners to attend that night. It's certainly not purposeful, and so I do apologize that we've not been able to make that, but please don't view it as purposeful that we've not been able to meet with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. I would also say that we have talked about publicly that this was a plan to demolish this building for several years now. It's been a part of our capital improvement plan, and the county is working with Gould Evans Architects to talk about a master plan study for downtown, our campus in downtown Lawrence. This site has been discussed at numerous public meetings as to what would be available on that site. What I would say is that while there are significant historical resources available to us as a county, we reached out to city historic planning staff as well as county staff. There was no indication that this building was a historic structure that should be saved. I would ask the commission to read carefully the structural report. I think there's more than just minimal structural damage to this building. There's significant structural issues with this building, including the south A-frame side. So I would say that. I'd also say that my understanding is that we can't add additional parking based off of the zoning and how far away it is to that particular lot. So if it was the notion that it could be, part of it could be torn down and converted into parking, my understanding is that's not allowed. If we're wrong on that, I'd love to get more information, but what we were told is that we already are sort of in violation, or very far away from the parking source of the existing parking lot. They're serving the courthouse and the law enforcement center, and there's an easement as well. Most of that parking lot is actually an easement that is jointly shared between the offices just to the east and the county. So we're really actually pretty close to the line there. I think that's all I have to say right now. Do you have any question for me at this point in terms of it?
Can you describe the easement a little bit more detail? Like, what is that parking agreement that's detailed in the easement?
Is that the letter that Tamara Worth
Yes.
sent in and talked about?
Yeah.
There's, in the packet, there's a letter that talks about that
Yeah.
specifically.
It is on the site plan?
Yeah, do you want me to?
Sorry,
I want to pull it up?
I knew it was mentioned. I wanted to know more about it. There we go.
Yeah, my understanding is, I can't point, but the easement is directly related where it jags over here to the south.
Okay.
The lighter hatch is the access easement, and the darker hatch is a parking easement, and it kind of runs down along the property to the east there. So those are
okay.
fixed pieces on this, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you need to step up to the microphone so everybody
They're gonna
can.
record you.
Those are easements that are in the agreement and basically take roughly the eastern 30 feet of the site kind of away. You can see where the easement runs north-south, the lighter one, that is the access easement for that property at 6, 12, 13th, I think is what it is. But so the whole kind of eastern portion of the site to the right of that gray area is pretty much dedicated to parking and access.
I did have one other thing I wanted to add. In conversations about perhaps the county selling this property, I just would ask if folks that would be interested in that do a little research on Kansas statutes related to how counties have to sell property. It's extremely difficult for us to sell property, and basically you kind of have to sell it to the lowest bidder, and it's not an easy process for us to sell property. So I do think that's one thing that would be difficult for us, is to try to renovate it for a use that we don't have and then sell it. I know that's not a consideration necessarily in terms of the historic preservation of that site. I just think it is a consideration into the county and our ability to utilize the site.
How long has the county owned this property?
Good question. I think 70s? What do you think, since the 70s? It's been vacated since 2014, when we relocated our Public Works Administration office to a new site and co-located it with our Public Works Operations Division. And it is being it's been used for storage and exercises by law enforcement, so for different exercises that the police department and the fire department have used. It's been used for that purpose since then.
Do you know the last time the county has made any improvements to the property or even maintenance to the property?
When we were occupying the building, we made significant improvements to the process, to the property internally. It is not ADA compliant. There is no elevator. That was one of the issues that made it very difficult for us as a public building to continue to maintain it. In addition, structural issues began to be developed at that point in time. There's been significant movement of stone from the foundation.
Are you saying that all this just happened in the last 6 years since you vacated? I mean, that's...
No, not all of it. And ma'am, I wasn't here. I wasn't in charge of the facility. I've only been county administrator for a year or less than. And so, but before that time, it was maintained in terms of its occupancy. It was not renovated, is probably a fair statement, or restored. Is that fair? fair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, I think some of these problems are longer standing than 6 years, which indicates to me that there probably wasn't some of that maintenance done. But, I mean, I'm not going to argue about it. I mean, some of the issues that are there seem to be going back some years, not just in the last 6.
Agreed, and I think that was part of the analysis the county went through in terms of the size of the structure was not sufficient to serve our purposes. And we, again, had no indication that this is, a historic structure that was on any sort of register that needed to be preserved. We checked with multiple people, had multiple conversations about that. So in very public conversations, we had a lot of discussions about how best we could use the site.
You talked about the master plan, and I realize you don't necessarily have to have a purpose now, but what are the conversations about what the purpose of this would be in the future? There's got to be some idea.
There's nothing determined and decided, so I'm a little reluctant to express opinions that have not been expressed by the Board of County Commissioners at this time. There have been proposals to build a structure on the site at some point in time in the future. And it is a part of a larger plan to renovate the historic 1905 courthouse and the law enforcement center as well. But I don't have any sort of confirmation from the commissioners, and there's no approval of that at this point in time. So I can't really plan. I don't want to plan that we're going to build a building there and have you all think that that's what we're going to do.
I'm not asking to hold you to anything, but I also understand if you put it out there, then somebody might think that, so.
Yeah.
And in that same vein, I'm wondering if the county's already expressing a willingness to preserve the courthouse and other structures, why not preserve the more historic church portion of the structure and incorporate it into this larger master plan instead of demolishing?
As I said again in our numerous conversations about the structure, we were specifically told that there wasn't necessarily any reason to preserve this, the south side of the structure. I think there were a lot of conversations with the architects that it would be difficult to incorporate that into, and I'm sure there's lots of creative ideas, so I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but that it would be difficult to incorporate into a larger structure that would take up more space on that site.
Do you feel that they would be open to having that conversation if it was determined, all of a sudden we find that it is historically significant? Would they entertain the conversation? Well,
I also want to tell you that I think this master plan's 5 to 8 years away. So in the meantime, the building will stay vacant, and it'll be difficult for us to make investments in a structure that we know eventually we're going to demolish significant portions of it. So I don't have any consensus on the master plan in terms of how quickly we would move that. It would require a significant investment of taxpayer dollars. So the county's not in a position to have a time frame to move forward on that at this point.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Would you allow me to add one fact?
Can we reopen public comment?
You can ask a question of someone in the audience, but they cannot. Well, have you closed public comment?
No.
Okay.
So public comment is still open. Just state your name and sign in.
My name is
please.
Katie Walsh, and Sarah was saying that the Kansas statutes, it makes it difficult for them to sell county property. But Dennis Brown is here, and he can talk, knows a lot more about this. But when the 4 lots across on Rhode Island were, the county gave them up, they didn't really give them up. They went into the Lawrence Community Land Trust, and the homes that are there have a 100-year lease. Therefore, it was not a straight purchase. And it's a win-win for everybody, because then it's cheaper for the people who are living there. Somehow, but I don't know, it's beneficial to the county, but it gets around that statute. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission to discuss amongst ourselves.
I need to do one thing. I am Dave Evans. I no longer work with the firm, Gould Evans, and I have no fiduciary responsibility at the firm. So I think we've had this conversation before, and if anybody thinks it's important that I refrain please say so.
No. No, I value your opinion. I'm glad you're able to provide it. That's my stance. I do want to add one bit of history. So thank you, Stan, for being an inspiration. I am known for over-preparing myself for these, and I did a quick search on my computer because I thought the Assembly of God sounded familiar. And just in my own, I am an architectural historian and have a lot of Lawrence history stored on my computer. And in that search turned up a document that links this church directly to the Castle Tea Room and the financing for it. So I don't know, it's probably not common knowledge, it is to me, but not probably to everyone else, that the Castle Tea Room did fall into foreclosure. It was used as a boarding house during that time until they found somebody to buy it. The person who subsequently bought it was the Assembly of God Church, bought the home to dismantle it and use the stone to build their church. Fortunately, the Lawrence community, the plans never came to fruition, and in 1947, the church was sold the building to a surprising new owner, Libby Crisfiorito. So Libby worked out a deal to not only purchase the castle, but also do the first half of the financing for the church for their own stones. So in light of all of this new historic evidence that's just starting to unravel, I think all of us have kind of seen this as a tertiary kind of building. It's just always kind of been there. No, it's never been on anyone's radar. I think in the last week, and for me, the last 30 minutes before this meeting, to find this little tidbit to add to Stan's, I think warrants kind of to take a pause, to go ahead and ask that if Stan's willing to volunteer a PSIQ, to submit that to the state and get the state's recommendations on its determination of eligibility and what they recommend. I'm not saying yes or no, I just think we need to take a quick pause and defer this and fill out a PSIQ if Stan's willing, or anyone else willing to volunteer, submit it and get SHPO's comments back to us and what they recommend, and if it is eligible as a historic structure.
Are you asking to defer this item to next
Yes.
month?
And that we ask that somebody submit a PSIQ. Defer until we can get SHPO's comments. And rehear it next month when we have the comments.
Deferring is one thing. I mean, I think we have to know that I don't think that the county, no matter what that says, is going to be applying for any sort of historic status. So, I mean, it may, but I don't think that they're going to go there. So if we all go into that knowing that, then
I think the key is that we have a certain job, and our job is to determine whether it encroaches upon, damages, or destroys one of these properties. And so if we feel like a PSIQ will help us do that, I mean, I could support that. I mean, I have some, this gives me great pause, this whole, even without that information, removing a structure in the environs is never advisable. Right. It's never preferred.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I, to the extent that I can, would challenge the county to take this seriously. And I understand that they may not use it, or they're not using it, and maybe they won't be using it, but the point is that they should take this seriously. And I don't know if deferring actually helps the cause. And so I'm torn. In some ways, I want to deny it and put the onus back on the county to begin to take this seriously.
So on that notion, if this is denied, because it's a certificate of appropriateness, the, what do you call it? The burden of proof falls on us. So it's going to get appealed to the city commission. Then it's up to us to prove, not the applicant.
That's true. I mean, there's one phrase in the staff report that perhaps some additional research will help refute, and it's on page 3 of 37 of that report. Under project review 1, 2, third paragraph, last sentence, the A-frame roof of the building is visually distinct, but it does not in itself rise to the level of architecturally or historically significant, and is not characteristic of the era in which the landmarks were constructed or that the environs are designed to preserve. And so, I mean, staff comments carry tremendous weight with me, always have. And so, if there's something, I feel like we would need to have something to rebut that.
Right.
If we were going to go ahead and deny.
Yeah, and the same thing, I noticed that the overall character of the area can be substantially impacted by the removal of a principal structure on a site, particularly when the structure is large and exists in a prominent area. So to your point, there's enough there that I think we do need to seek more information.
So, are you making a motion?
I'd like to comment.
Go ahead.
By all means.
Please.
You know, I think this is an environs review. And, that the county owns the property. I don't know if it makes a lot of difference who owns the property.
Shouldn't.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. And I think we have to show that it does impact the listed properties. We're looking at this property as an historic property, which it is, but it's not a listed property. And I think that there's a distinction. We can't impose upon the owner, even though we think it's a great structure and should be preserved. I don't think that's our role to do anything other than determine whether or not their application impacts significantly on the listed properties. That's my take on it.
I think I've heard that take before.
I love consistency. All right, I make a motion that we defer this and seek to have a PSIQ submitted to the state to get their recommendations and also give us time to uncover that much more information, both in ownership, the transfer of ownership, what all that entails, the eligibility of historic status. Am I missing anything?
I don't know, you're making a motion, I don't know what I'm allowed to do at this point, but, I'm just going to say it. So, I mean, Stan talked about the 1905 Sanborn showing a structure in this location. And so, having a little bit more time to research that.
Yeah, the change over time.
Because it's all about environs, right? That's really what we're talking about
Yes.
here. And it's and so if this changes the historic environs of those two listed properties, then we have a firmer ground upon which to stand if we were to deny.
Yeah.
Is that a
Yes, yeah,
friendly, addition to your motion?
It is, because I do know the 1958 Wheeler plat of Lawrence includes in his diary commentary on that the property surrounding the park should have a town hall, a church, and a civic structure, a library. And we kind of have that. So I assume this was the church he referred to. So, or the 1905 site.
So you're done with your motion? Is there more to that motion?
Can I restate more simply.
Clarify the motion.
Yeah,
that-
clarify,
okay.
clarify, yes.
Let me clarify. I move that we defer this item to allow additional research to be done, the PSIQ to be submitted to the state to get their comments back to us, and for the investigation of what does it actually mean for the county to sell or transfer land.
Just out of curiosity, the PSIQ, I mean, how long does that take?
They usually take up to 30 days.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, passes 4-1.
Could I ask when the recording of this meeting will be available for the doctor who's traveling and sent you the letter and can't be here, so she can listen to it? Yay,
Oh,
thank you.
yeah.
That's great.
See.
All right.
All
Quick
right.
question.
Yes.
Can a deferral be taken to the city? I mean, as we made a decision, well, we decided to defer it. Could they appeal that decision?
No.
Really?
Right.
Good question.
I've gotten several different answers on it.
I think it's no, but I'm no attorney.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So where are we at? We are at miscellaneous matters. Item number 1, Historic Preservation Fund grants.
So every year, we come to you at this time of year talking about Historic Preservation Fund grants. That is money that is from the National Park Service, passed through to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they in turn pass through money to local governments for preservation activities. There's a little bit of information in your cover summary memo about some of the things we've done with HPF grants in the past. It's important to note that it's actually the city that applies for those grants, not the Historic Resources Commission. This would be a public hearing to get recommendations from the HRC as well as people from the public on what grants to seek. However, the Planning and Development Services Department budget and director will forge the path as to what we can actually apply for based on those budgetary constraints. So it would be appropriate to open up for public comment and then have discussion amongst commissioners. There are a couple of projects identified in the cover summary memo. Phase 2 of Barker Survey, which was a grant 2 years ago, and just recently you had the consultant come and share with you some of the information from that survey. So one possible grant would be Phase 2 of that survey, and it would also identify if there's a historic district between the Phase 1 and Phase 2 surveys. Another project we've been talking about for a while is the Old West Lawrence Historic District. That nomination was written in 1972 and is about 4 pages long. If you've seen a National Register nomination in the past 15 years, you know they're a little bit longer and more in-depth now. We also don't have a contributing, non-contributing list for Old West Lawrence, so doing a new National Register nomination would help us get that information for review of projects. The third suggestion from staff was the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions Forum to send a staff person and maybe 1 or 2 commissioners to get training on historic resources commissions and how they work.
So is one of those 3, or can we do them all?
You can do them all. You can it's helpful if you prioritize which grants you think would be most appropriate based on what you hear from the public and then what your comments were, any grants that you might think are appropriate.
Yes, we will open it up for public comment. If there's any suggestions from the public.
Those are all quite worthy. But I want to throw another one out there that might not work for this year, but perhaps next year, or another grant. The city, 2 weeks ago, I believe, had a wonderful 2.5-hour meeting about having a brick policy in Lawrence for streets, sidewalks, stone curbs, and slab stone sidewalks. This was a huge breakthrough. There was a brick policy in 2013 that all it did was make it to the HRC and no further. But not for, I mean, the HRC was happy with it, but it didn't go to the city commission. They didn't want to talk about it. So now we have a more open political field. Anyway, part of the dilemma is we've been asking the city to save brick, and there's all these bricks out on the west side of town piled up. To reuse them in streets, you have to have pavers. You have to have really vitrified solid bricks so they won't crumble, they won't break. They'll last for 100 years, as they should. What we need, the city is uncomfortable with having volunteers go out and sort them. And also, because they say, you know, if it rains, nobody will show up. But one of the city engineers has talked to Gavin Historical Bricks up in Iowa City, and they're in the business of identifying and palletizing. They would come and do it, sort them for us, but they'd like half our brick. And at the meeting, everybody's like, no way. So one thing that was talked about is having Gavin come down and train people how to sort the brick, which, you know, 1 to 10, this one you should use for a street, this one you should smash. And
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to pause real quick. Do we need to take care of what's happening out there at all?
No.
They're just starting to get loud and kind of distracting, and I didn't know if we should ask them to.
Doesn't bother me.
is it,
It was kind of distracting, so I
okay.
wasn't.
They could just move them.
I'll try to be more compelling.
No, you're good.
Lastly, we talked about, but we don't know what it would cost to having Gavin come down and train people. And we also talked about perhaps we could pay people $15 an hour to go out and do it. You know what I mean? So we're thinking, perhaps we could write a grant and get this figured out so that we have it ready when we're going to repair a street or do a block. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Brown, Lawrence Preservation Alliance President. Certainly continuing, there's great ideas here. Let's do them all. Continuing with the Barker survey makes a lot of sense. Old West Lawrence definitely needs a rehab of those documents. The brick committee that's formed, there's great people on it. KT, I'm real glad you're on it too. That's a really good thing that we'll have to watch, and maybe there are ways to put a little money to some really good use there. I've been at 18th and Wakarusa on the city-owned lot where all the bricks that came off of 19th Street are all just piled, I mean, way high. There's just tons of it, and a lot of it is chaff, but you figure there's plenty that's really good too that could help people with their brick sidewalks when they want to relay their brick sidewalks and they need more bricks. They're all sitting out there. They just have to get from that location to the neighborhoods where they can be put to use. But the other thing I do want to mention, and I think I'm kind of doing this more as a placeholder, is a conservation overlay district with downtown, with design guidelines for the East Lawrence neighborhood. It's been talked about, and that's still out there. I don't know, we don't have a planning director currently. Maybe this isn't the right year, but I do want to bring it up. And I know we're starting to look at the strategic plan that's getting a rewrite at this planning office, and looking at the strategic initiatives. I think there were 9 of them that were identified in the plan 3 years ago. One of them was completing 9th Street. How about, well, that's done. How about a conservation overlay district with design guidelines in the strategic plan as a strategic initiative for East Lawrence neighborhood.
Anybody else? Okay, close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Any comments, questions? Motions?
So Lynn, we're supposed to recommend just recommend the grant submission itself, not.
Correct, just if you choose, if you don't choose, you don't have to, but we'd like to get input from the Historic Resources Commission on what applications we should submit.
Well, I think since Barker's kind of already underway, I think it would be good to seriously consider that, to finish out the phase 2 so we have enough information to move forward with the conservation overlay if it's deemed appropriate. I think it'd be good just to kind of wrap it up instead of just letting it dangle out there.
How many do they submit? I mean, is each one, each of these are applications, so.
Correct.
Can we submit an application for all of them, or?
We could. It's a competitive grant process, so you would want to prioritize what you recommend submitting for.
So what would you recommend of those lists? What do you think is the most important?
Well, the ones outlined in the cover summary memo are the ones that staff thinks are good projects that would have a good chance of being funded and would be within the department's budget.
So are you recommending that we recommend those 3 items, or just one of those items, or?
That's up to you whether or not you feel comfortable recommending those 3 items, if you have other 3 items, or...
I can't say as I have something that's not on this list. I'm just saying, do you have a recommendation as to like a priority list of these 3? Is it in order that you wrote it?
It would be the Barker Neighborhood Survey, and then the Old West Lawrence
Right.
National Register nomination, and then the training.
Let's do it.
I make a motion that we recommend to City Commission that we submit for grants as proposed by staff in hierarchy order of Barker Neighborhood Historic Resources Survey Phase 2, Old West Lawrence Historic District National Register Nomination Update, and it's staff and commission training to attend forum.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I do have one question related to this. I think with KHRI being open to those who can data entry, there is a whole lot of data on Old West Lawrence and East Lawrence Neighborhood Association that you can start populating the KHRI with. I think anybody can apply to be somebody that does that data entry, correct? So once you get your user login, you can start data entering. I think that would be a great way to start moving the needle on the East Lawrence neighborhood data entry, and also updating some of the Old West Lawrence houses that may or may not fall within a potential district, revised district. So all those who can hear me, I encourage you to find ways to make this happen on your own. Next item. Review and comment on Z19, or the special use permits and other applicants.
I think your cover summary memo explained why this is on your agenda this evening, and you don't have to make a comment. Chapter 22 allowed you to comment on rezonings and special use permits, and so staff brings those forward to you should you so choose to comment.
Does anybody have any questions on any of those applications, or want to make comment or not comment?
Nope. Not me.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess we're not going to make a
Not
recommendation? Yeah.
I don't care.
I mean, none of them seem particularly despair that the other,
I mean, we've already weighed in on those first two.
right. And the other one is just updating the ownership to continue, allowing the new owner to use it the same way as it has been.
Exactly.
So we will remain silent. Item number 3, DR 19-00368, demolition of accessory structure.
The commission reviewed this project a few months back. It was demolition and new construction. It's Certificate of Appropriateness review, a state law review, and an ORIA neighborhood design guidelines review. Since that approval by the Historic Resources Commission was demolition and new construction, since then the applicant has come to staff saying that they can't do the new construction at this time, and they would like to move forward with the demolition. Just briefly reminding you, this is the project location. This is Kentucky Street and 11th Street. This is the garage structure that was hit by a tree and made the roof collapse. You may remember just looking at some of those photos. It's kind of hard to see some of them, but staff's initial assessment was that some of the deterioration of the structure was just normal deterioration over time. The applicant or owner had been maintaining the structure, but some of those deficiencies were just of a building of this type over time. However, when the tree fell on the structure, it did some racking to the structure. It also broke some of the structural members. And here you can see, like, even on the exterior, where some of those rafters were disjointed from the structure. There had been some other things going on with the structure where boards had been sistered, some had been cut in strange places. So when the tree fell, and here's showing some of the wood rot, when the tree fell, it didn't help the structure any as far as its racking was concerned. So staff is of the opinion that the structure has been condemned by our code enforcement officer. Staff is of the opinion, because of the severity of the deterioration of the structure, that it may warrant demolition without the new construction. So staff is recommending that you approve the Certificate of Appropriateness, that the project will not significantly encroach on, damage, or destroy the landmarks. That in accordance with the state law review, that you find that the project does not damage or destroy any historic property. And the ORIA Neighborhood Design Guidelines is a little different. It requires a replacement structure for demolition of structures that are over 50 years old, but it also allows for exceptions if you document the reason for that exception. So staff would recommend that you find that the structural deterioration and the damage caused by the tree would warrant the exception to that replacement structure. I'd be happy to stand for any questions you might have.
I do have a process question with this. By making this decision, are we kind of overturning or throwing out the approved replacement, and they'll have to reapply when they do have the funding to move forward?
They would need to reapply and go through the process.
Okay.
This would amend that application,
Okay.
so it would be demolition only.
Is this a rental?
And no, it's owner occupied. I believe.
Who knows anymore? I just wondered, because they're wanting to put a pad in.
Yes, concrete.
So I guess I was a little skeptical that they were doing that something else would go in there. But
Any other questions? Thanks.
You would need 3 motions for this item.
Do we need to open it up
But
for
you
public?
did public.
Okay. Public comment on this, anybody? No?
come on now, it's only 7:05 almost.
Making this too easy. All right, bring it back to the commission. Is there a motion? Who wants to start the motions?
Let's do the state law review motion. So in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards, I move that the commission make the determination that the project does not damage or destroy any historic property included in the National Register of Historic Places or the State Register of Historic Places.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
And then certificate of appropriateness, in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Code of the City of Lawrence, the standards of evaluation, I move that the commission find that the proposed project will not significantly encroach on, damage, or destroy the landmarks and issue the certificate of appropriateness for the proposed project.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
And then finally, the Oriad Neighborhood Design Guidelines Review, move that the commission find that due to the structural damage of the existing structure, the proposed demolition should be approved as an exception to the Oriad Neighborhood Design Guidelines requirement for a replacement structure if demolition, as an exception to the Oriad Neighborhood Design Guidelines requirement for a replacement structure.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
I have one more miscellaneous item. This evening is Commissioner Veach's last meeting, so staff just wanted to thank him for his service, and we really appreciate everything you've done to help protect historic resources in Lawrence.
He can't go. I move that we don't allow him to go.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Favor, aye.
And if I was going to have a second go-around, Matt, I wanted it to be longer than 2 meetings.
No, I'm sorry.
I was going to nominate you for chair.
I know. Yeah, so for those, anybody who didn't hear, I'm retiring from my service as state archivist on September 18th of this year, which is about 7 months from now.
But who's counting?
211 days.
Yeah.
In 6 hours and 36 seconds.
That's pretty much how it goes, yeah. And my wife is also going to retire after 35 years from her job at Black & Veatch, and we're going to sell our home at 1646 Mass. And
That's 1646 Mass.
1646
Yeah.
Mass.
Right of first refusal.
Yes, and we will put all of our, we've downsized to about 25% of our possessions, and it'll all go in a 10 by 20 foot storage unit. And we're going to drive our Prius away, and we're going to travel the US, and we'll travel the world, and
Great.
Wow.
it's a dream.
Send pictures.
Yeah, they'll be on Facebook, so, yeah. Anyway,
Awesome.
so
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
That's cool.
And thanks to all of you for being great fellow commissioners.
Thanks to you.
Thanks. Gonna miss you. Thanks, guys. Especially thank you. I guess I got one more thing. There is the strategic planning next Wednesday. They've got 2 different sessions. I encourage anybody to sit in and participate. It's open to the public, isn't it? That's how I read it.
I don't know
but-
if those are specific to commissioners or if they're open to the public. We'd have to check.
I thought it was open. If it is
It
open to
may-
the public, I encourage you to attend.
And do we need to ask, I mean,
That is true. We forgot to do that.
go ahead.
Commissioner Veach is the HRC representative for the downtown master plan. I did check, and if the commission so chooses, because he has the familiarity with the process and the project where it is so far, you can appoint him, even though he won't be a commissioner on the HRC. He can be your appointed representation to continue on the downtown master plan.
Great idea.
I would love to do that. Are you going to be able to do that from Europe?
Well, I don't know, how much longer?
We have one more meeting that will be sometime in the spring.
Yeah.
And hopefully the master plan will be going to the city commission this summer.
Yeah, so I think I'll still be here.
Okay.
That would be great if you would
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yes.
Could you please make that as a motion and vote?
That we, so I will move that, I don't know what the word is, Matt be our emissary to that? Is that what it is?
Appointee.
We'll appoint him in our stead.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Can't imagine anybody opposes.
That just means you stay on the payroll.
I know, that's it, yeah. I look forward to those checks.
I'd ask for a raise.
Well, you're going to be traveling, so they're just going to pile
I
up.
know, yeah.
Thanks, folks. Adjourned.